In this next slot, which stands between us and coffee, we will have 3 short presentations, lightning talks from 3 of the QQI funded research projects on rethinking assessments that Padraig spoke about this morning. So for this session, I would like to invite Professor Marie Clarke, Dr. Cormac Quigley, and Patricia Nunan to join me on stage. They will each present in turn on their funded research projects, and they've been given a time slot of 10 minutes each. So we'll be watching that closely. What you guys don't know is we have like a big clock visible to us here, and it's like a countdown clock. So come on up, please, and join me on stage. And each of them will introduce in turn their particular contribution, and we're hoping then that we might have time for a few questions before that coffee break. Take a seat. I think Marie is up first. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. First time to do a lightning talk. I'm doing it with my postdoc, Dr. Deirdre Stritch. We happen to come from the one part of the country where we talk to each other personally in a very lightning way. So whether that works here or not is another matter. I want to thank, first of all, QQI very much for the funding that they provided us with to support this particular project. Without it, it couldn't have been done as well as it was. We wouldn't have been able to employ Deirdre based on her outstanding experience in the quality field and also her brilliance as an academic as well, which was crucial to this. It was part of a wider university project which we did under 6 work streams to try and look at the impact of COVID actually on the experiences of faculty and students. And the first thing was in relation to online assessment and its design, and we did a complete literature review on that internationally in terms of the different types of approaches. We consulted with our school heads of teaching and learning across 35 schools to get their insights about their assessment identity, which actually didn't yield very many results because they found it quite a challenging concept to try and explain to us, but also in terms of their views about academic integrity. We conducted an institution analysis of all of the data that we have in our UCD assessment unit to see how things were shifting and moving towards online or not in that regard, and the issues that were coming up in terms of academic integrity. We also put together a programme of work, our UCD Teaching and Learning Unit, in terms of providing support around academic integrity, and that work is all going. And we had a university-wide communications piece where we had a website where we demonstrated reaching different milestones across the project and where people were able to submit their views and points of view. And we also had a number of HEA-funded SATL projects as well ongoing, dealing with academic integrity and artificial intelligence and all of these things. The area itself, in terms of we wanted it to be evidentially based, not just international research, which is very important to learn from different institutions, but also that it's evidentially based within our own context. And that meant getting the views of faculty, the Students' Union, from assessment unit, from our UCD Student Engagement Conduct and Complaints and Appeals, the library, our quality office, IT services, Academic Council Executive Committee, Teaching and Learning, our deans, associate deans, our education technologists. Now, the reason I'm emphasising this is because this is very, very complex, and people have different perspectives depending on where they're located within the institution. And this project gave us an opportunity to bring these people together to see where everyone was coming from, which resulted, I think, in a much more holistic approach and a more holistic policy that we passed at Academic Council. But also it made us realise that the work was ongoing. So you can see the breadth of the work that was going. Deirdre will present the views of our students, which were crucial to this, and thank you very much for my part.
Thank you. Thanks, Marie, and good morning, everybody. I will, as Marie said, speak quickly and move through this piece. So there was multiple strands, this particular piece of research. We don't have time this morning to look at the outcomes of the research in relation to each of the various objectives of those strands. So I'm going to look in more detail at the outcomes in relation to students' knowledge and understanding of academic integrity and their experiences of online assessment and how the choices that they made in that context. So the research in that regard consisted of a short, anonymous online survey that was conducted in class with both undergraduate and taught postgraduate students across the university. Almost 30 module coordinators facilitated completion of that survey in class across 27 modules. 1,972 students engaged with the survey, and that represents about 6.5% of the student population on the Dublin campus. We had good representation across all cohorts. We didn't have stage 5 and stage 6 learners in any meaningful numbers. They're the one exception. And within the survey, the response rate was 77%. So we have confidence that the findings and that the perspectives expressed here are genuinely representative. So we asked students about the information that they had received on academic integrity and their knowledge and understanding of academic integrity and related terms and concepts. Overall, students expressed strong confidence in their knowledge and understanding, with 2 exceptions, and that was in relation to contract cheating and to collusion. We also asked students about their perspectives on what constitutes ethical or unethical practice in various forms of assessment. The vast majority of students considered cheating, plagiarism and contract cheating to be unethical to varying degrees. However, about 38% of students reported that sharing your own past work with another student is ethical or only somewhat unethical. A further 23% of students responded that unauthorised, and I'm stressing that part because use of AI tools was permitted within parameters within the university, but unauthorised use of AI tools is ethical or only somewhat unethical. Other behaviours that they considered to be ethical to some degree included selling your own past work, which of course is a criminal offence here in Ireland, assisting another student to cheat, or collusion. The second figure we have here, we asked students for their perspective on how common or uncommon they felt cheating to be in various forms of assessment. And they responded, so you can see down here at the bottom, that cheating is rare or it's uncommon in supervised in-person exams, so as you'd expect. And then up at the top here, that cheating is common to varying degrees in short online exercises, multiple choice quizzes and so on. And in other forms of online assessment, such as take-home exams, online submission, unproctored online exams, etc. So when asked about the factors that might prompt or promote a student to engage in misconduct, a number of factors were identified. The most significant one was time pressure, so either in the form of tight deadlines or multiple deadlines coming at once. Lack of knowledge of what constitutes academic integrity or misconduct in a given context. Lack of confidence in their own ability to do well without having recourse to cheating. The culture in the classroom, so a perception that other students are cheating and that you'll be in some way disadvantaged by not cheating yourself. You'll be at the bottom of the bell curve. They were followed by a perception that getting caught is unlikely, so cheating is easy, essentially. A lack of competence or confidence in academic writing skills, and then a lack of positive relationship with faculty. Conversely, factors that might promote academic integrity included communication of expectations in place, fewer assessments or better spaced assessments, more authentic assessment, and then better awareness building and skills building being particularly important. At the end, then, we asked students about their own willingness to engage in academic misconduct. And as you can see here, about 7% of students said that yes, they would. There were circumstances in which they would engage in misconduct themselves, and a further quarter of students were unsure. And as you can see, program stage had a really important impact on students' willingness or their self-professed willingness to engage in misconduct. And it's worth noting here that these stage 4 learners had enrolled in 2020, so they were the COVID pandemic students. So whether this response reflects that anomalous experience, or whether stage 4 is a particularly vulnerable period on the academic journey warrants further exploration. Again, would they help another student to cheat? Very similar findings. What I haven't here is that international and visiting students were almost 2.5 times as likely to report that they were willing to assist another student to cheat. I have quotes here you can read yourselves, but reasons for that students gave us to why they would assist another student to cheat. included that acceptance of unauthorized use of AI is ethical. As I said, AI was permitted in certain contexts, but students felt that the varying rules around that were confusing, and actually they felt there should be no restrictions around the use of AI. Lack of relevant knowledge of understanding of what is required for an assessment, so that cheating was the only way they felt that they could get a good result. And with that, I suppose, fear of failure, stress and pressure, time pressure, and then the culture in the classroom, a perception that others are cheating and you'll be at the bottom of the bell curve if you don't. Reasons for assisting another student. Over 60% of responses fell into the category of altruistic reasons. So if somebody was really struggling, they needed my help, they asked for my help, I'd give it. Again, low probability of getting caught. There's no consequence for this activity. It's easy to do. And a perception, rightly or wrongly, that either the assessment itself or the circumstances under which the assessment has been taken are unfair. And then finally, we asked students what more the university could do, or was there something more the university could do to help prevent academic misconduct. So responses were that greater guidance and information on from UCD on what on academic integrity, some more the training aspect of it, improve assessment design and delivery, permit and mainstream the use of artificial intelligence tools, ensure a better spread of assessments and reduce the overall assessment burden on students, consistency and clarity around rules, which sometimes can vary between programs or even between modules as appropriate to the content, and then improve assessment feedback. I have a quote, but I know I don't have time to read that through, but I think we can probably share afterwards. So in conclusion, what we found from both the faculty and the student feedback is that academic misconduct is more likely to occur in online assessment than in in-person assessment modes. And what we heard quite strongly is that misconduct is easy to do, it's hard to detect, and therefore may not appear in the academic record. The other issue of note is that students' responses indicate that collusion, sharing and or selling of their own past work, and unauthorised use of AI tools are areas where students both lack knowledge and have more ambiguous and or positive perspectives regarding the ethics of such practices. And a little bit more research, I think, is required to explore whether or not stage 4 actually represents a particular point of vulnerability in the academic journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Professor Marie Clarke and Dr. Deirdre Stritch, and also for keeping to the time. Thank you very much. Now, without further ado, Dr. Cormac Quigley is going to talk about his project.
Thank you very much. And thank you to QQI for the opportunity to present our work and also for funding it in the first place. So myself and Dr. Quigley set about this project, the real project, developing intelligent assessment toolkits across NFQ levels. Not artificially intelligent, just intelligent. What do we mean by that? Well, we wanted to reimagine what we could get out of our assessments through the virtual learning environment. So we wanted to create things that were suitable for all NFQ levels. We wanted to create things that were an authentic measure of what happens in the real world, that would allow us to then develop a toolkit that could be given to other people, shared, and then we wanted to see how we enhance learning through that. Why? Why? What's the problem? Well, the problems are obvious. Lecturers don't have time to give individual feedback on every individual's work. The questions in VLEs are typically thought to be simplistic or not related to what actually happens in the real world. And students often fail to contextualize their theoretical learning when it comes to looking at things like their work in the lab or anything else. And then over-assessment always sits in behind all this. So what was our work plan? Well, we had a work plan. This is what we ended up with. Did we learn things at the end of it? We did. So we looked at the different NFQ levels and we tried to see, well, what kind of needs apply to 6, 7, 8, 9, the different levels. We created a set of sample questions. We created associated training documentation. We deployed those Moodle questions. We went back to square one. We did it all again, and then we evaluated the question effectiveness. What should an ideal question look like, though? Because that's the question. Where are we going with all this? Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, when we think about the VLE, often it's MCQs or it's single answers, but complexity should not be limited. And in the age of computing that we live in, it should be possible to ask any question, perform any mathematical operation, and give students feedback on their work. Grading schemes also, if we think about grading in person, we don't grade as a simple yes or no, right or wrong. Often we have very complex grading schema that we just do ourselves. We have non-linear things, we give attempt marks, we give deductions, but we don't give double deductions if students make a mistake early in the calculations. Typically that's not possible through a VLE, and that's what we've been looking at. And then finally, feedback for students. If you give student feedback, it should be relevant to exactly what they did and not just general. So that's where we were going with all this. And what enabled all this was this idea of formula questions. So we were based in Moodle and we used a formula question type. And if you've never heard of formula questions, I don't blame you. But essentially what it is it is a programmable question type where everything is on the table. You can design your question type, you can design the evaluation of the results, you can design the feedback, you can design whatever you want. Of course, with that level of access to design comes a serious level of a requirement in terms of what you need to put in to design the question, and so you see the problem. And so, like I said, we did this twice. Version 1, we said, well, I know, let's just make a few questions and see what happens. We'll put them all together, and we got about 50 questions together that were suitable for different NFQ levels, made some training documentation, and said, hey, who wants to try this out? And various different lecturers said, yeah, we want to try it out in our institution and other institutions. It didn't really solve any problems. We shared lots of documentation. People still had an enormous burden to overcome. So we said, well, where are the issues in this? People don't want to watch a 10-minute video to be able to make a question. People don't want a one-day learning curve. So we said version 2, well, how can we simplify this? Much later on in the project, we hired a computer programmer, and he said, well, we can simplify this process. You don't need to write your programs through Moodle. And we developed, as you can tell from the very snappy URL, what is just migrated to the cloud of a Moodle question wrapper or the question portal. If you want to check the QR code, you can have a look. It's up there. It's working. But in 3 things, what it does, 1, it gives you a repository where questions are classified by subject or NFQ level. 2, it gives you a question design wizard. So in Moodle, if anybody's ever used Moodle, you'll know that every time you update the question, you have to refresh the page. If there's an error in it, you can't refresh the page, and you have to go finding the error. In this, it takes all that and it makes it not possible to make errors because you insert things one at a time. And then also there's a quick editor because sometimes you want to be able to edit a question without loading up your VLE and logging in and so on and so forth. So that was a nice solution. And that's where we got to in terms of making this open access. That's now available, and videos and documentation are also available. But what does all this mean? Because at the moment I'm just telling you, well, here's a new technological solution. Great. So let's just look at one case study from my practice. I'm a chemist. I run the first year chemistry labs. Typically we have 300 to 400 students doing those first year chemistry labs, 20 to 30 sessions a week. And in those first year chemistry labs, each student's work is unique. Each student gets their own sets of results. They do their own calculations. They have varying attempts at those calculations in terms of the accuracy. Their experimental technique varies. They get better results, they get worse results. And within those chemistry labs, there are a lot of implied prerequisite pieces of knowledge that you need to have. And so if you were to give each student personalized feedback, you'd say, well, you missed this and that's what you're missing. Can we do that through our questions? And the answer is, well, I think so. So what kind of questions can we ask? Students can take their data and they can put it into a question. So we can gather all of the data that the student gathers, and now we're free to assess and evaluate it and give the students the feedback that they need. We can apply any grading schema we like, and we can give feedback that is both immediate and very specific and very relevant. What do I mean by that? Well, here's a very simplistic example. So you ask a question, what liquid did you put into the conical flask? You used a pipette. What was it? Most of them get it right, but some of them don't link the idea, well, I used a pipette and I put this liquid in here and that was the standard. So if they get it wrong, we can show them a specific picture of what they did or didn't do. And you say, well, that's not too interesting. But then the students are also required to put in things that are unique to their own work. So what did you get as your result for your titration? Or what did you get as a result for your standard curve? I've chosen a very simple mathematical model here where they're literally just calculating an average, but if they want to do linear regression, they can do linear regression. Any mathematical operators are possible if you're willing to put the time in to program it. In this scenario, we want the students to both have precise lab work, but also correct calculations. And if you were marking that yourself, you would mark those 2 things independently. You would say, did they calculate the correct average? Some marks. Did they get the right lab work done? Did they get a precise titer? Some other marks. And so that's what we can do here, and we can give the students their own information back and say, well, this is what we were expecting of you. We were expecting a value of 0.1 mil or better, but you got 0.12 mil. So you're out by a little bit, you need to improve your work. Before, all students got was right or wrong, or in fact, students wouldn't be able to evaluate it. They'd have to wait for the lecturer to come around to look at their lab book in a very hurried 2-hour lab and move on. So this was a big improvement. In terms of grading schema and what's possible and what's not possible, here are just 2 samples to make you think a little bit about, well, how do I grade work, or how do people grade work? So the upper is we are asking students to measure a known value, and if they get the known value correct within the experimental precision allowed by the instruments that they're using, they can have all the marks. Outside of that, the further they get away from the right answer, the lower the mark they should receive. To do that actually by hand would be almost impossible because you'd have to calculate it out, and usually if you do that, you do it as a rough estimate. Here we can now do that in a very linear and very fair manner, in a very objective manner. The students don't always like that because sometimes they want the lecturer to say, you were close enough, have the marks. The other possibility is that the students' grades fall into different scenarios, so different criteria apply, and you can give full marks for scenario A, or some marks for scenario B, or some marks for scenario C, and so on. As you choose, it's up to you. So we now have a situation where instead of having to manually grade lab work and take time out of the lab to go and give that feedback to students, they can take their real-world lab work, bring it into the virtual learning environment, and close that loop. In terms of closing that loop, we can also look at it as a program level, as a program team at a program level. If we have 300 students, approximately, depends on the week, doing their lab, we get an awful lot of information. And again, just 2 simple examples from practice. So first of all, we ask students to calculate density. 20% of students get that calculation wrong in their first attempt. That's not something that you pick up if you're just going lab book to lab book and you say, well, just try that again. So there's a learning gap there, and we need to improve how we explain that in the lab. The second one is, I think, a much more powerful example of what's possible. We ask a student to measure a value, and they should get 0.998 grams per centimetre cubed, exactly, the density of water. As a cohort, they don't. They get 0.9945. That is a impossible to see difference on an individual one-to-one in any given set of 16 students, but it is an enormously statistically significant difference when you look at the cohort. And it tells us that we are not teaching our students correct technique in terms of how they're using their pipettes. So we can change, we can make a program level or a lab book level change, talk to the instructors and change our practice. Putting all those things together, what we have created, I think, gives an insight into what is possible in the virtual learning environment. With enough resources and enough thought, it's possible to develop questions that really facilitate learning in a way that isn't just abstract or entirely theoretical, that brings the real world into the virtual learning environment and back again. And these advanced questions, we have more data, don't have time to go through it, didn't put it in the slide because it's only 10 minutes, but would show that students really do benefit from this match of the virtual learning environment and the laboratory environment. Thank you for listening. And here's the project team.
Well done. Again, Cormac, thank you very much. There's a lot packed into that. And finally, I'd just like to call on Patricia Nunan to give us her 10 minutes.
Good morning. So conscious that I'm standing between you and coffee, I will be as brief as I can. I'd like to officially take this opportunity to thank QQI for funding this research project, which, as you can see, is an investigation into the use of technology-enhanced simulation as an integrative, authentic assessment approach on a blended learning professional programme. So I suppose the aim, well, first of all, the use of a virtual scenario-based learning, a VSBL as we're calling it, is a relatively recent phenomenon as documented across research and generally underutilised in initial teacher education, which is where this piece of research is situated. It's on an initial teacher education programme, the Professional Master of Education primary programme. And it offers, I suppose, a unique opportunity for student teachers to experience classroom life in a controlled and managed way where aspects of behaviour management and developing professional relationships can be applied in a safe space, I suppose. So the aim was really to develop this virtual scenario-based learning with the aim of enhancing their self-efficacy by providing these virtual mastery opportunities, and also then to formatively assess programme learning outcomes in an authentic manner. So we had, I suppose, one main research question, which I suppose at the centre of it is really what are the characteristics of a virtual scenario-based learning authentic assessment environment to improve pre-service teacher self-efficacy. And two supplementary questions then, I suppose, does that virtual scenario-based learning authentic assessment environment affect their sense of self-efficacy and assess the programme learning outcomes? And also then, what are the design considerations? So our research design was an educational design-based research methodology. It is, I suppose, the features of an educational design research approach is that it's theoretically orientated. It uses existing theory to frame inquiry, and then that ultimately helps to create a solution in practice. It also is interventionist, so there was an interventionist part of this research. It's collaborative, which was absolutely crucial because we worked collaboratively with the student teachers to create the virtual scenario. It was responsive to their needs, and it's, I suppose, it's not just for practice. It also is with a keen eye to theory. It's responsively grounded, in that it's shaped by their expertise. It's shaped by literature, and it's then shaped by field testing, and it's iterative. So our use of educational design, it was chosen because of that collaboration aspect and the opportunity to use an iteration in it. So we use one iteration of the process. Over a number of phases. So we used an exploratory sequential mixed methods approach where we had collection and analysis of qualitative data. That was then followed by a development phase of translating those findings into a tool that was then tested quantitatively. And I suppose this means that the tool that we have designed, it's grounded in the views of the participants, absolutely crucial to support this self-efficacy of the student teachers, and emphasises exploration before the design and the construction phase. So on the screen you can see a visual of the phase, I suppose. Phase 1, from April to June of 2023, so liaising with our student teachers, then choosing an intervention which was focused on teaching, learning and assessment, classroom management and universal design for learning, then literature review, data collection and analysis. Phase 2 then was design and construction of the virtual scenario-based learning, excuse me, and phase 3, evaluation and reflection. So what does this virtual scenario-based learning, what does it actually look like? So first of all, the student teachers it's very much a personalised learning space. The student teachers select an avatar, then they're presented with a number of different lesson introductions, which they select. Sorry, my clicker's not working. Okay, then they select, in terms of a school context, they can select a background for the lesson, a lesson plan, whether it's second class or third class. So they're making choices as they progress, and they're reflecting on those choices. Then they select a lesson introduction, lesson development. So there are a number of choices at each stage in this virtual scenario-based learning. So they select a lesson development, and then an intervention happens. So this is something that disrupts their choices, I suppose. They're presented with it could be a classroom management scenario, and they have to make a choice here. And there's tutor feedback which comes in at this point, on the choices that they've made. Then they choose a lesson conclusion, and the next slide just shows all the different pathways that on this virtual scenario. There are 9 different possibilities or 9 different pathways through the virtual scenario-based learning. And finally, tutor feedback and reflection. So there's an opportunity at each stage for them to get feedback on the choices that they're making in a very safe space. Because the student teachers, you know, in general, they feel very nervous before they go out on their first school placement, and this is supporting their self-efficacy in a very safe space for them to make these choices before they're presented with them in the actual classroom setting. The next slide just gives you a very short, I suppose, visual of what this virtual scenario looks like. So it's a virtual classroom. Sorry. I don't know if we can press play on that. It was to give you just a... So there is no sound, it's just to give you a sense of it. So they're choosing their avatar. They're making a choice of a lesson introduction development. Here's their virtual classroom with their children. 26 children. Very much with I suppose, you know, a universal design to learning approach. And then the choices. So they're asked, you know, are they selecting a second class? What's the prior knowledge from that class? A lesson development, a lesson plan. And they're making choices all along, as they would if they were preparing to teach in class. And so on. Okay, so we don't need to watch the whole thing. So that was just to give you a sense of what our virtual scenario-based learning, what the tool actually looks like. And I'd like to thank you for listening. I hope that's given you a sense of it. If any questions, obviously, we can take them afterwards. Thank you.